Having your house wiped out by a disaster is not a comfortable conversation to have with someone. Most of us probably don't think it will ever happen to us, but when it does, it changes your life forever, and the road back to normal is a long one. My guest today is Doug Quinn. He was a victim of Hurricane Sandy, which hit New Jersey back in 2012. It took 7 years for him to get back in his house, and as you will learn today, it's an experience you never want to have. Once you hear his story, my hope is you will take some type of action and try to prevent it from happening to you. I'm George Siegel, and this is Homeowners Be Aware, the podcast that teaches you everything you need to know about being a homeowner. Doug, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, George.
Yeah, you ended up being, and people will see when Built to Last Buyer Beware comes out, one of the stars of the film. I want to thank you for being in our documentary film and sharing your story. But for people who aren't familiar with it, you were a victim in Hurricane Sandy, and that was a really major turning point in your life, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, I had a cozy life before then, a single financial advisor, making good money, living on the beach, and basically this came in and it upended my whole world. I mean, obviously, I allowed it to a degree, but there were many things that were out of my control, and we've learned things that would curl your hair.
Now, as somebody who's learned so much, let's just go back before that. When you were living in this house and you knew you're on the East Coast and there are hurricanes, there are nor'easters, there are all kinds of bad things that can happen, did those ever enter your thought process?
100%. I mean, I come out of the insurance world. I'm a financial advisor for 3 decades, so I am very risk management oriented. So, obviously, I had researched the house had been built in the late 50s. It had never flooded once during that time. But just to be safe, I bought the maximum legal amount of flood insurance that I could buy. I mean, if I could have bought more, I would have bought more. I only had to buy enough to cover my mortgage. I bought double that amount. And you know, look, I looked at the patterns. Is this a significant flood risk? It did not appear to be, since there had been no flooding for 60 plus years. And then I went further and insured myself, transferring the risk to be on the cautious side.
Did you ride out the storm in your house or did you evacuate?
I rode out until the water got to about my ankles or close to my knees. I had evacuated the year before. We had Hurricane Irene come through. They said that was going to be the end all be all. I evacuated, and it came into the street in front of my house. It wasn't that big of a deal, and I always kind of regretted like abandoning my house. So I said, when Sandy came, again, here's the next end all be all. I'm going to stay. They're coming through with evacuating our neighborhood. And I just said, I'm going to stay, stick it out. And, that literally did turn out to be the end all be all.
Now, what would you say the mindset of your neighbors are? I mean, I have a kind of a similar living situation in that I live in Tampa, Florida, and we're the next big bullseye that everybody always talks about. But I would say there's a very complacent attitude from a lot of my neighbors. Most people don't think it's going to happen to them. Most of them don't have generators. Most of them probably don't have a plan. What did you find in your neighborhood? Were people caught off guard? Were they surprised? This is the cost of living in paradise?
Nobody expected it. I mean, New Jersey doesn't get hit with a lot of hurricanes. And again, this neighborhood hadn't flooded basically since it was built. So no one expected it. Nobody was prepared. And we have a lot of elderly people in our neighborhood, and a lot of them, because it's on the water, are second homes down here on the Jersey Shore. So most people evacuated, but I don't think they were prepared for any of the other facets in terms of protecting their property. So we were all sort of caught by surprise at the ferocity of the storm and how hard it hit us.
Okay, so Sandy blows through. You have major damage. What was your thought right after the storm? Were you optimistic that, hey, I have this coverage, I'm going to be okay, we're going to be on our feet again? What was your thought process?
Exactly that, which is, hey, we live in a great country. There's a lot of support mechanisms for us. I have bought the maximum legal amount of insurance. I am good. It's going to be 4 to 6 months of difficult times. It's going to be, it's going to suck, to be fair, for about 4 or 5 months or so. And then I'll be up and running because I did the right thing and I paid for insurance. And I really had no way. I mean, to the point where I had a land and it was hard to find. You have tens of thousands of people out of their homes. It's hard to find a decent rental. And I had a 15-year-old daughter with me, so I had to be careful about what neighborhood I'm in, what kind of quality of a house that I'm in. So it took me, I mean, we lived out of our car for a month, and it took me uh probably, that time to find a decent place for us to live in or rent. And the landlord wanted a year lease, and I was like, no way. I got $250,000 of flood insurance. I will be home in 4 or 5 months. And the way I compromised with him was like, I'll tell you what, if I pay you, because I was afraid of going back home and owing this guy another 6 months on the lease. So I was like, if I pay you $100 a month extra and you'll let me go month to month, we did that. And I paid that man $100 a month extra for 7 years. It took me
Right.
7 years to get home.
Now, would you say you believe you might have been one of those people that just fell through the cracks, or are you more typical of how the insurance company just doesn't care?
I can't say either of those cases are 100% true. I will say under no circumstances will I allow myself to fall through the cracks. Okay, I'm educated. An investment financial professional. I know a lot about the insurance world. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I fight everything. I live in an area of the country where we are very comfortable fighting and advocating for ourselves. So I would not allow myself to fall through the cracks. I did push, I did fight, I did advocate for myself. And nor would I say at the other end that the insurance industry doesn't care. Look, there are a lot of really good people in the insurance industry. People who take pride in what they do, people who take pride in being able to show up with a check at your lowest moment. But it only takes a few to gum up the whole works. And what we see is there's people that are straight out greedy and straight out fraudulent, and they are actually looking to enrich themselves by taking advantage of others and skewing the system, tilting the table against the consumer in order to get the insurance company's favor, get contracts, get jobs, get promotions. And it doesn't take a lot of those people to really have a negative impact on the consumer's experience.
So if I hadn't met you and I hadn't met a lot of people that have experienced bad things like you have, it would be very hard to wrap my head around how how in the world could it take 7 years to take care of you?
So what happens is, the way it should work and the way it has worked for people. I mean, it's not like everybody gets cheated. There were people that had good experiences. You put in your claim, you basically cash your check, you rebuild your home, and you go on your merry way. Now, what are all the things that can go wrong at every step of the way on those? First, let's say this. You go to cash your check and maybe you don't have the experience that all the TV commercials tell you. My insurance company offered me 37 cents on the dollar. They sent in an engineering firm out here to say that this was not flood damage, it was earth movement, which is shifting of the supporting soils. And that's what cracked my foundation and flooded my house with 4 feet of water. And by the way, earth movement is a convenient exclusion from flood insurance. The shifting of the soils, even though the soils might have shifted from thousands of tons of water landing on it, but that's what they said. So my insurance company offered me 37 cents on the dollar. And I'm thinking, because again, I grew up in the insurance industry, they just don't get it. It's a mistake. I just got to explain it to them the right way. I just got to show them the right pictures. They don't, and it took me a long time to come from where I was, a big firm believer that everything works out happily ever after for insurance consumers, to wow, this is not an accident. This is a plan. This is a strategy that people have in place. So, working through that process, the insurance piece, turned out to be an absolute battle nightmare. And then, finding a builder is difficult because again, you're in an area, I love these things where people are like, use a local builder because the outside guys, the storm chasers are fraudsters. The guy in your neighborhood who builds 5 houses a year is not putting 100,000 people back home anytime soon. You do not have enough organic capacity to repair all those properties. So you have to bring people in. And by the way, what zip code you live in does not determine whether you're more likely to commit fraud or not. We had a guy right here in our own town that was around for 20 years. He was the basketball coach. He stole a couple of $1 million and left the state from people. So, but there is challenges finding a builder. And by the way, do you know anything about building a house from scratch? I don't. Most people don't. I don't know what a roof costs. I don't know what it's like, where I should pay to demo my own property. I don't know what are good windows. There's like so many, the decision tree. So that becomes difficult. And then the next step is, you're dealing with the government. If there's any kind of federal aid package involved, that's a nightmare. Now you're dealing with your town, your own town, with, code improvements and having the right amount of setback around the property. I mean, it's nightmare, nightmare, nightmare. And in the meantime, I'm trying to raise a teenage daughter. I'm trying to, put a decent roof over her house. I'm trying to make a living and pay the bills. And I'm doing all this and all these fights and all these battles and all these things that I'm in no position to, suited by nature or education or experience to do. I'm doing all this. We call it the decision paradox. You are 1,000 decisions are suddenly heaped on your plate. And I'm doing this while traumatized and not in the best frame of mind and not in a good position. And that's the decision trauma paradox. When you have a significant loss like that, the amount of decisions that are heaped on your plate, go up tenfold. And there are decisions in areas you're not used to making those decisions. How do I build a house? What's the right kind of windows? You know what I mean? How do I negotiate with the town for permits and setbacks and code? And how do I find the right builder? How do I not get, all of these things fall in. And that's happening while your decision-making ability is compromised. We see very smart people make very dumb decisions. So for me, I did what many trauma survivors do: slow it down. Like I'm not comfortable making this decision. I don't have confidence. Slow it down. And whereas, I wound up having to go through a grant program and get money from the federal government, which burned me. I should have just got money from my insurance that I paid for. Should not have to rely on taxpayer money for this. It's really unconscionable that happens. But basically what happens, I should have been planning the building of my house while that was a multi-year process, except I'm doing things in like a linear method. Well, I'm going to make this decision and then I'm going to make that decision. And then once I have the money in my hands, then I'll do this. So part of it was I wasn't able to do better. Part of it was the system was dysfunctional. Part of it were many things were going wrong. Part of it was I was way in over my head. And again, doing that in an environment of trauma where I'm just kind of baby stepping along. And look, dealing with depression. I had days I couldn't get out of bed. And again, I'm an aggressive person. I'm a high energy person. That's not me. So, we see what these survivors go through and they have no idea what's on the horizon for them.
Now, when you talk about all the weight of all those decisions and how you have to do that, to me, that seems like that's a reason a lot of people get ripped off when they would assign their benefits to somebody that they thought could handle all that and take it off their shoulders. So it's really a conflict there. It's like, wow, I can't do all this stuff. Let me find somebody who can. But you might be turning that over to somebody who doesn't have your best interests at heart.
And that can happen all the way around. Any business transaction, you're a possibility that somebody doesn't have your best interest at heart. But disaster zones tend to bring those people like flies to what. And look, I know a lot of people did very well with assignment of benefits. I didn't see that here, in Sandy. I wasn't even aware of the term until we started watching it have problems in Florida. Because again, it takes it off like, well, now I don't have to go fight my insurance company. Here's a company that does it every day and they'll do it. And granted, people did take advantage of it. I think it was kind of the impact was overblown. I think the insurance industry has a great strategy of playing victim, and then they wind up, getting, well, It's so much easier to deal with a traumatized homeowner who's never done this before than it is to deal with a construction company who does this every day and knows what things actually cost and can advocate for you and can say, no, that's not a $4,000 roof, that's a $10,000 roof. So I think it makes it very easy for the insurance industry to cut those people out. They seem to have a strategy of cutting out the attorneys, the public adjusters, the contractors who are all aligned with the consumer at the time of a claim, and then just making it so it is just the consumer one-on-one, never done this before, and traumatized on top of that.
Is their lobbying group as powerful in New Jersey as it is in Florida? Because they pretty much seem to run the legislature down here.
They run a majority of the state of Florida, the leadership. I can't necessarily say because we don't, what I've seen in New Jersey during Sandy was an incredible disappointment on the part of our elected officials. Our governor, who promised he'd be with us till we got home and then left the state to go run for president. Our insurance commissioner and Department of Insurance, our attorney general, who sat on their hands and did nothing while we all suffered. And we knew tens of thousands of people were getting taken advantage of. And look, I grew up in the insurance industry. If somebody said to me, I'm calling the insurance department on you, I wouldn't have slept for a month if that happens because they're this aggressive department that's going to come down and protect the consumer. And then when the time came, they did nothing. And to be fair, flood insurance is regulated on a federal level. It's under the NFIP is under the Department of FEMA. It's a FEMA responsibility, but that does not mean that the insurance department of my state should have been advocating for us. And they did not. They literally sat on their hands. Was that because of a lobby or maybe just because of a lack of, bureaucratic lack of effectiveness? That we really didn't start digging into the impact of the insurance lobby until we watched Florida start to blow up. And then we were like, wow, this is egregious.
I remember the image of Chris Christie's career going down the toilet when he hugged Obama on the tarmac, and that image of it, which to me, okay, that was not a great optic for Republicans, but to me, the governor should be advocating for people. But it sounds like he kind of bailed on you guys, in your opinion, anyway. So it doesn't sound like there's any victory. The only true satisfaction is getting your house fixed.
Yeah, and look, to be fair, so what? He hugged, a president who's from the opposite party. This is what we're supposed to do in a crisis. We come together and
Yeah.
we put our differences aside and we work to help our citizens. So I thought that was look, he hugged the guy, that's great. He hugged a bunch of victims, that's great. He really was on point in the beginning. But he was doing the right thing. But then again, it came to like, well, I've got all these people who aren't home yet from this disaster, but I can go chase my own political career and be president. That's where he went off the rails.
Yeah, that's probably pretty common. So when you look back now, you finally get back in your house. Did you ever get the fair amount from the insurance, or was it cobbled together other ways? So I know it took 7 years and it was horrible, but did you eventually, with persistence, get what you were entitled to, or did you come away going, "Wow, I took 7 years and those guys still screwed me"?
No, I got enough to build a nice house here. Okay. But it's, the analogy I use is it's like the Shawshank Redemption, right? You look at the end of the movie and there's Morgan Freeman walking on the Mexican beach to Andy and it's paradise and he's finishing up his old boat and it's amazing and they're going to live happily ever after. Would you take that if I told you what he had to do to get there? 20 years in prison, getting raped, getting beat, his friends getting murdered, having to call through a 500-yard tunnel of shit to get to that point. So you could look at the point I'm at now and say, oh, look, he landed on his feet. But the reality is, I went through hell for 7 years. I did it. And it impacted, my other responsibilities. My daughter was 15, really needed a 100% dad, not a 50% dad, because I'm fighting all of this. My parents each got sick and died during that time. They needed a 100% son, not a 25% son, because I'm here doing this. So, and of course, all of the damage I did to personal relationships because I'm trauma. Literally, I considered that disaster to be a form of mental illness because I really was just, having mood swings and mental health issues and, you know, temper issues. I can't go in to the local branch of my bank. I am banned for life because I had a disagreement with the manager over something silly. And rather than do what I know to do, which is let's find a way to work out a compromise where I blew up in the middle of the bank. And she said, leave. If you ever come back, I will call the police. And it's 10 years later and that still exists. And then same thing, I'm working with our governor's team trying to, we did a lot with advocating for the other survivors. And one of the agency heads said the wrong thing. And rather than me just calmly educating him, like that's an insensitive thing to say about the people who've gone through such a trauma and aren't being treated well by their state government, I blew up. I'm cursing in front of female. I mean, it's just inappropriate. And I had to go outside and collect myself and come in and apologize. And that's not me. Either of those instances, that's not me. I mean,
I
I
was
almost
going to
got,
say, I'm glad I didn't piss you off in our interview, but I can't even imagine. I've met victims, not as many as you have, but it just, I see how they're changed by the disaster and what that does. And I don't think it's like you're in an exclusive club that people don't really understand
right.
if they're not in it because they haven't lived through what you're living through.
Right. And you will never be the same. That's what we tell people, stop trying, because I kept thinking, I gotta just get back. I can't wait. I remember, meeting my current girlfriend saying, I can't wait for you to meet who I really am. This is not me. I can't wait to get back to when life was normal. And there is no going back. You will be changed forever. And for these people, there is a line in their life before the disaster, after the disaster. And you will never be the same. The best you can do is pick up the pieces, learn your lessons, put things back together as best you can, and go forward. But that's the idea. People don't understand. People are, like if you're looking, we try to tell people in cat zones now, like if you see your spouse, using drugs or drinking way more than they did, or losing their temper, having mood swings, or, you know, pulling the covers under their head till 3 o'clock, over their head till 3 o'clock in the afternoon in bed, and you know that's not them, that's trauma. And we want to, explain that to people because of the fact that they don't think, they just think, oh, well, I'm a terrible person. I mean, I was got into a fight in Dunkin' Donuts over a parking spot with somebody. Again, that's not me. And I just wish somebody had come in before and say, look, you're going to see these things. It's trauma. It's not you. Give yourself a break, breathe, back up, and think, is this really who I want to be right now? Or is this possibly the trauma speaking and I need to, do some self-care to alleviate that?
So how do we fix this? Because it seems like to me insurance is like when you go to the casino and there's a lot of places you can buy chips at any table, any game, the money's thrown at you, but there's only a few places you can collect it. You have to walk to the back of the casino and get in line to get your money, whatever you want to leave with. That's what insurance seems like to me. It's not easy to get back what you're entitled to. You have to work for it. And that just doesn't seem right. How do we fix that?
I don't necessarily like the gambling analogy with insurance or investment,
But it
uh,
is a
but
gamble.
but I will say this: the guy sitting out front on the boardwalk hawking, like, hey, come in, make $1 million, that's a different person than the dealer and the person who's supposed to pay you out your chips. The people, all the TV commercials and Flow and the Gecko and all this stuff, or your local agent who is a decent person and does, volunteer in the community, and you do see them in the grocery store on Saturday, they want that policy to pay just as much as you because they got to look you in the eye and they believe it's going to pay. But your agent and they do not, and the Gecko and Flow don't pay your claims. They don't handle your claims. That's a whole other department that in many cases isn't even part of your insurance company. It's a third party TPA, third party administrator that they hired to handle their claims. It's an engineering firm. And that's where we see a lot of the crime occur. There's check writer bias on the part of these companies. And the way we fix it is by enforcement, is by a deterrent. We have to have, these actual people have to be investigated and prosecuted. If you stole $20,000 from an insurance company in Florida, you'd be in handcuffs so fast your head would spin. If the insurance company steals $20,000 for you by changing a report, or one of the vendors they've hired does it, they need to go to jail as well. And that's not what we're seeing happening.
Yeah, that's why I like the gambling analogy. Where I think it works is only because you just don't know what's going to happen. You're just you throw your money down hoping you're going to win. But with insurance, it's almost like they have a plan to make it as difficult as possible. I've dealt with this with health insurance. I've dealt with it on smaller claims. I've had flooding, but nothing like what you've lived through. And it's always that feeling of you feel like you're a criminal trying to pull something on them when you're really just trying to get what you thought you were entitled to when you were paying them all that money.
Right. And you're not, there is no winning. It's a contractual obligation. It's for you to get what you've paid for. You paid for years and decades, sending checks in. You never had a problem. Now, when it's time for you to get reimbursed for a legitimate loss, all of a sudden there's problems. And when you say there's a plan, you are correct. There is a plan. And there's right here in Jersey, there's a Rutgers law professor named Jay Feynman who wrote a book called Delay, Deny, Defend. And he specifically lays out the plan that the insurance companies hired a consulting firm, a really high-edge consulting firm, and said, it's a flat market. How do we juice our profits up? And one of the things they did was they focused in on the claims department as a profit center. Insurance is a zero-sum solution. If I pay you $1, I lose $1. How do I not pay you that dollar? Or how do I only pay you 50 cents of that dollar? And, the strategy, which has been defined as delay, deny, defend, actually is a plan. They've actually used it to train their claims personnel. There is a PowerPoint out there that specifically shows how to do that. And it's a problem because it went from how are we in the business of indemnifying people for losses and making sure they're made whole for everything they're entitled to how do we put corporate profits ahead of the welfare of our consumers?
So in a perfect world for them, you might have gone away after a couple of years just because you would have realized, I got to move on. And that's what they hope a lot of people do. Is just move
And most
on.
and most people do because they call that, and they've actually done studies, it's called capitulation, where after a certain period of time, 6 or 9 months, the average person, you just want to fine, just give me whatever. I've saw it as a financial advisor, people who had lawsuits, and a lot of the ideas with these physical injury lawsuits are, they stretch them out for 3 and 5 years. So if you might start out being like, I'm not settling for less than $10 million. Go live on disability for 5 years and see what happens. And you'll settle for, $12 and half a tuna fish sandwich. I mean, that because people just can't take it anymore. It is a living nightmare. And you wind up neglecting so many other areas of your life. You neglect your kids, you neglect your relationship, you neglect your job. And the cost is huge to fight one of the most powerful industries in the country. It is a big, big cost, and it's an incredible commitment, and the average person is not suited to have that fight.
Yeah, and my state just did something which I think is just it makes me sick to think about. Although they defend it, is if you have to sue your insurance company, you no longer get attorney's fees. So now these guys can bully you into court, knowing if you win, you still won't have enough money to fix your house because you're not going to pay the guy you had to drag in. And the insurance industry actually defends that as being good for the consumer because it'll stop litigation. To me, it just screws the guy who's a victim.
It has done absolutely zero to stop litigation. It has done absolutely zero to uh, stop the premiums from going up. I mean, this was the big promise because Florida, especially, premiums were going up, premiums are going up. It's these greedy lawyers. And we kept asking, look, I don't like lawyers any much as anybody else. I have some personal friends who are lawyers. I have respect for them. But as a category, I think the insurance industry landed on that. Who do people hate almost as much as insurance companies? Lawyers. Let's blame it all on them. And it's frivolous litigation. We kept saying, okay, well, if you're a plaintiff's attorney and you only get paid if you win the case, how does it help you to file an illegitimate case? How does it help you if the consumer doesn't get paid? You don't get paid. It's a contingency payment. So, and then no one could explain, give me the statistics. How many cases in Florida were thrown out because they were frivolous? How many cases were dismissed because they were just unjust and had no factual grounds? No one will answer that question because, again, it's not to their advantage. And then since they took away your right to recover your legal fees, if you sue your insurance company and they are found to have illegitimately cheated you on a claim, that shouldn't come out of your pocket. That should come out of their pocket. But, the end result is they took that away, and even the insurance commissioner of Florida has made a statement that said litigation was never the sole reason for premiums going up. Litigation was never the sole reason for all these companies going under. Not a single company has been cited as having excessive or frivolous litigation as a reason why it went under. And by the way, they're claiming victory because, six or so new insurance companies came in after that law went away, but some of them were already on the drawing board before. And I don't think it had anything to do with that law. I think it was the fact that your insurance premiums doubled. And if you double the cost of a latte, Starbucks franchises are going to trip over themselves to come to Florida and open up a Starbucks franchise. That's just the way it goes. It is increased. They caught some of the state legislature. A state legislator was involved in opening an insurance company, and he's sending emails out to other legislators saying, hey, it's a really good environment now to come in and make profits on insurance.
Jeez.
It's so, and by the way, since that law went through, we've had several insurance companies just in the last month or two file for 50% rate increases.
Yeah,
It
it's insane what people are paying. And I was complaining because I thought mine went up and was too expensive. But then I see other people that are paying way more than what we're paying, and we're confident we have a company that actually would be on our side if push came to shove. I mean, we all hope that. But I just think them doing that is just I don't know how I know how you hold them accountable. You vote them out, but from what I hear, the lobbying industry gives money to both sides, so the side in power just looks like the bad guys.
well, again, I don't necessarily want to look at sides because I think there's good and bad people on both sides. But I do think in Florida, much of the political leadership has taken a lot of money from the insurance industry. And look, there may be people who are voting for these bills that think it's the right thing because they're getting pounded by, this is wrong. This is what's happening. It's all this frivolous litigation. It's what we really see happening in Florida. Much of this is these smaller companies that are owned by hedge funds, private equity funds, anchored offshore, and they're hiring their own corporate affiliates to drain money out of the insurance company and show a loss, and then they're paying excessive, I mean, egregious executive compensation, ownership dividends. They're basically, bankrupting these companies by draining all the assets out. It's much of it looks very much like corporate embezzlement to me.
Now, what do you think when you look at an area? We were back in Mexico Beach, looking at how they've rebuilt that area. An expert we talked to there said people actually fought to have the standards lowered because they thought they were building at too high a code that was stopping people from coming in and developing. But they're building mostly wood houses on pylons that are elevated. And we talked to some experts that said this is a disaster waiting to happen. When you see a place that's wiped out and they're not rebuilding to a standard that would survive what wiped them out, what comes to your mind?
I'll tell you, we were in Hurricane Michael, helping out. We were in Mexico Beach, and I'll tell you, it's not a disaster waiting to happen. It's a disaster that already happened because that beach was littered with stick-built houses on wooden pilings that were wiped out. There's just little shreds of the house on top of wooden pilings. So you never rebuild in the same place that is suffering the same risk with the same construction methods. I mean, when I rebuilt my house here, I built it 10 feet in the air. I would not be able to live here if that wasn't the case. And we tell people, when we go into areas, you've got to do something different. If you rebuild the same kind of property in the same kind of a risk zone, you're going to get the same results. You're playing roulette, and when you put your head on the pillow at night, you know it, and you're not going to sleep well. Again, we see a lot of people with anxiety issues, even after a storm like that. When there's a heavy rainstorm, people start getting anxiety. We see that in communities. It's a community trauma that they're experiencing. So whereas emotionally that comes out, but if you say intellectually, well, guess what? My house is reinforced concrete. I built it up in the air for flood. I protect it against wind. I protect it against fire if I'm in a fire zone. That's the issue, to make sure because if you're going to go back and live in the same place, there's nothing wrong with that within reason. But at the same time, you better make sure you mitigate that you don't have to go through the same thing again. And I have very little sympathy for this system where we just keep rebuilding the same risky types of construction in the same risky areas. And in the end, it's the taxpayer who's going to come in later and bail people out.
Well, yeah, and sadly we see that throughout Florida. That was another big issue in the film is there's a lot of areas in Fort Myers, in Pasco County, up in the Panhandle, where they're building huge apartment complexes. There's one a mile from my house, a couple miles from my house, four buildings, wood frame, right on the bay that are apartments. And I've had people say, yeah, that could probably survive a category 2, maybe a 3. But if a bigger hurricane comes in, or if there's a fire or anything really bad happens, it's going to get wiped out. And those are people that obviously aren't affording owning a house. They're renting. Everything they have is probably in that apartment.
Right. And that's the idea that the way that we look at mitigation, it should be to the level of national defense, because it is national defense. We have to look at the threat to our population just from what's going on with, if you're in an area with fire or flood, you have to make sure you build to whatever the existing peril is in your area. And we got to stop sticking our heads in the sand, because I see this all the time. I constantly talk to people. We've never had a tornado here before. We've never had a flood here before. A hurricane has never hit. This area has never burned before. I hear that from people all year long in different cat zones, just like my experience. This property has never flooded since 1957. Well, guess what? That doesn't count anymore. All of that, it's a different game, and you have to say, here's the legitimate risk, and I better make sure that I protect my property and my family from that risk.
Well, one of the arguments I hear against that is, Hank Ovink, who was in my last film, The Last House Standing, he was big in helping redesign some things in New Jersey after Sandy. He said, how much can you really bunker your entire community? You want to protect essential services. You want to protect things that will help you get back on the ground, get your feet on the ground quicker. But for every person to build a concrete block house that's could withstand a category 5, he didn't necessarily think was realistic. Would you say if you can't do that, you just shouldn't live there?
Yes, absolutely. You should, if you cannot protect yourself and your family from the peril, then you should not live in a perilous area. Now, here's the challenge. Where do you go that has no peril whatsoever, that has no, local? There's some kind of a risk in many places, or places like this where we had a fairly stable environment. We didn't have significant risk. So where do you draw the line? You draw the line at what's reasonable, and what is a basic scenario. Like, there's got to be some community mitigation that goes on. There's got to be some, after Sandy, there was all this talk. We had a big storm, a nor'easter, in I think 1993, the early 90s. And they said, all right, here's what we're going to do. There's all these proactive things after a loss, a disaster. We're going to redline on places that shouldn't be built. If you have a house there, that's fine, but you're done building there. If that house gets wiped out in a storm, that's it. It's going to be blue acres. There'll be no more building on that the next time around. We're not going to insure you. We're not going to bail you out with public money. You go elsewhere. So, and of course, that never happened. After a year, you never heard another word. After Sandy, there was going to be a seawall from one end of the state to the other. That never happened.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a lot of talk. I think people just take the risk. There's a lot of houses in my neighborhood that are 2 or 3 feet elevation when the storm elevation is 11 feet here. That's the flood elevation.
Yep.
It's crazy to me that people take those risks, and I see some people just remodeling those homes. They're not elevating them. I know that's very expensive to do, but I think it's just the gamble that people take because they don't think it's really going to happen.
And now you're using the word gamble appropriately, because that's exactly it. Look,
I knew I could work that in positively somewhere.
you feel better, you feel vindicated,
I do. Thank you.
you win.
I
Okay.
won.
My house here, I only had to raise 5 feet. I raised it 10. And what's the situation with that is, we call our house the Stairmaster. You're up and down stairs all day long. Bringing in groceries is a challenge, but and I got bad knees, you know what I mean? So here, but who cares? because I wanted to be as careful as possible and as prudent as possible. We made sure we had hurricane straps. I make sure that I have my windows are rated for certain level of wind. And there's a sweet spot there where it becomes, because certain things, look, if you're a direct hit by a tornado, you're a direct hit by a fire, you're a direct hit by a hurricane, you know, many structures are not going to survive. But we see a lot of structures that are outside of the actual cone of disaster, but are impacted, and they could have avoided that. In fires, you could just have had some degree, a 30-foot defensible space. You could have, plants that are fire resistant for your landscaping. You could have covering over the openings into the house so that embers don't get in. You could have a fire rated roof. And something like that could be the difference of your house burning to the ground and having nothing, or your house surviving a fire and not having a problem. And it's similar with wind and flood events. Am I pretty comfortable being 10 feet in the air if there's a flood? Yes, I am. But my community, to speak to your question, has to also pitch in, because what good does it help me if my house is above the flood, but my whole neighborhood is underwater? I can't even get to my house.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. So tell us about the United Survivors Disaster Relief, the group that you were part of.
We're a look, it's a volunteer only nonprofit. We just say it's a very, very expensive hobby. Nobody gets paid. We just all volunteer. And it was started by storm victims after Sandy, because people had shown us so much kindness afterwards. People had kids from Mormons from Utah come and help me, clean up my house. I had people from college students from Appalachian State University in North Carolina come help. We had people send donations of food and clothing. And we really didn't think anybody liked New Jersey. It was very touching, and it had a big mental effect, an emotional effect. It is good to get the love of the nation, because you tend to suffer in silos. You're all alone. Even though my neighbor might have went through the same thing, here I am all alone, buried in this. So to have people from the outside show you that kindness meant so much. And when it came to probably about 5 years after the storm, many of us weren't even home yet. I certainly wasn't, but we saw Hurricane Harvey decimate Houston and Texas, and we have to do something. I mean, we just, we put a post on Facebook. We threw a bunch of stuff, donations into our private vehicles. We drove 27 hours down to Houston, and couple things. Number one, it was very important for us to pay forward. And number two, we found it to be very therapeutic. It was disturbing, driving into the neighborhood, and everyone's possessions were pushed out on the front for the garbage to come. I remember that day. That was very hard to watch everything I own gets thrown out of the front yard and carted away. But it was also therapeutic to be able to take what we had learned and help people out in their darkest moment. And it just sort of blossomed from there. We didn't have a name at first. We didn't have any kind of tax status. We just threw stuff in our vans and drove to disasters. And then it became, well, I had one of my financial planning clients give us a large donation. I wanted her to get a tax deduction, so we formed as a 501(c)(3). And then they were like, well, what's the name of your organization? So we had to come up with a name, and we had to come up with bylaws. And so over the years, it got more involved. And then we started seeing the pieces, not just the supplies that they need, but they need degrees. Like, what did we need? I needed some education on disaster trauma and where I could seek help, and even acknowledging that it exists. We also needed somebody who had lived through it to give us a hug and say, it's going to be okay. You can get through this, because that's sometimes the most important things we do. We're just in there giving people a hug and say, I've been through it. I've survived it. You will too. We can give you some tips on how to do that. We've actually wrote a document called 8 Tips for Coping and Thriving Through Crisis that was just based on our experience from coming through all this. And that kind of peer-to-peer, survivor-to-survivor therapeutic connection is so important. So then we added that to it. And then we found out, it was really important for us to do community organizing, because if the tendency is not to bring stakeholders to the table. There's a lot of money on the table. There's a lot of insurance money and federal money. And the people who wind up getting involved and profiting handsomely off it are the politically connected people from your state capital And they're the ones that actually will plan your recovery. And do they necessarily have your best interest at heart? Maybe not. So we're big on pushing people to do community organizing and make sure that survivors are brought to the table when we plan the rebuilding of our communities. One of the sayings we have is, no decisions about us without us. And the other thing we say is if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. And we understand that. So, again, there's another piece that we're doing. We found out there's a lot of, like us, people that in the midst of their darkest moment lift their face out of the mud and say, how can I help my neighbor? How can I help my community? And we isolate who those people are, and then we will fund them. We set them up with a nonprofit accountant here in New Jersey, and we allow them to form an organization that is a 501c3 organization, and they can now raise money tax deductible, meaning people who donate to them can deduct it off their taxes. And it's sort of a teach a person to fish kind of a thing where now those organizations who will be effective. If you give one of those small organizations of survivors in the cat zone itself $1, they will stretch it like $10. So, we look to, again, it was a thing that we had learned how important it was. And then we carry that forward into other disaster zones and get that experience out to people.
Yeah, I mean, disasters always bring out two things: the best of people. You see the heroes, the people that come to everybody's aid, and it also brings out the worst of people that then see innocent people that are damaged and then try to prey on them. So it's great to be giving them a lifeline like this.
There's
Tell me about
also
the American Policyholder Association and what you do with that.
the APA was formed because of the fraud that we saw happen in Superstorm Sandy. What we saw in Sandy was the insurance companies were hiring engineering companies, and some of them did a fine job, and some of them we caught them changing reports where it said the engineer on the ground was like this: the house was damaged by storm forces, and the engineering firm would now just add the word "not." This house was not damaged, so we caught them side by side creating fraudulent reports. What we did different in Sandy, 2,000 of us had sued. The insurance companies laughed at us because there were 144,000 people, claims, households that were impacted, 2,000 people suing, big deal. But what we did different in Sandy is we had the New York Attorney General raid an engineering firm and seize all their files. And they went back several weeks later and walked one of their executives out in handcuffs. And that one criminal arrest changed everything, because we were able to get the federal government to open up 144,000 claims. We were able to get $350 million paid out to people who had been cheated on their claims. And that was a deterrent. We know that there's a lot of people, like I said, many people in the insurance industry are doing a great job. They're there to help you. They take pride in helping you. It means a lot to them, but there are some people not so. And basically, they're doing a math calculation. If I sit here in my cubicle and I create a fraudulent report, which, by the way, we've caught them red-handed in Florida. We've had insurance insiders come forward as whistleblowers saying they're shaving 70, 80, 90% off our claims. And Florida is now investigating it. We are hoping that they give a fair chance to consumers and make arrests in this, just like they would if somebody's stealing from the insurance company. We're hoping that they're fair about it. But basically what happens if they say, well, if I make this change, big deal, my company gets sued. I'm protected behind the corporate veil. They've got lawyers for all that, no big deal. But if we change that calculation to say, if I change this report and I cheat an American family out of their most valuable asset, their home, I could get walked out of here in handcuffs tomorrow. That is a deterrent to crime. So that's what we're pushing for. And of course, it requires the cooperation of law enforcement, but we are the first ever, what's called an SIU, Special Investigation Unit. Every insurance company has one, that if because people do commit fraud against insurance companies regularly. So they have these SIUs. They're basically like a detective bureau. If somebody sees red flags, they send it to the SIU. The SIU investigates it. If they find out that, yes, somebody's cheating the insurance company, they'll send it to prosecutors. And now we are the only organization in the country that does it the other way around. If it looks like somebody on the insurer side is cheating a consumer, they turn the case over to us, and then our investigators, we have an SIU of long-term, 20, 30-year investigators, detectives, run by a former prosecutor who will look at it. And if it looks like fraud was committed or it should at least be investigated, we turn it over to public prosecutors. Here's the thing. The consumer should win every time. The consumer is who pays for this. The consumer who pays the insurance premiums that fund all the TV commercials you see, all of the political lobbying that that goes around to protect the insurance company. The consumer pays that with their premiums. The taxes that fund the public prosecutors are paid by taxpayers and consumers. And in the end, all of this should be done to help the consumer who's at the most vulnerable point in their life, having just suffered a significant loss. And everybody needs to put their own self-interest aside and come forward. So, for me to be happy, that would have to be like 99% of the time, not like every once in a while we get a victory. The reality is, if you're paying your premiums and that's funding that insurance company's SIU, and you're paying your taxes and that's funding your public prosecutor, shouldn't at least 50% of the efforts go to protecting you and your family from being defrauded on your insurance policy by either the insurance company employees or the vendors that they hire? Shouldn't you get at least half of that money to protect you, not just the insurance company?
Yeah, you would think, but it almost makes too much sense. I mean, I don't know how people sleep at night taking advantage of people when they're at their most vulnerable. I don't know how you could just reject that claim. I don't know how you leave people hanging like that. I mean, it takes you experience it more than me. How do these people sleep at night?
Justification is a big part of it, and they're also trained. They're trained to fit within a system. So, and it's certain choke points at the system where the fraud is occurring. Might not necessarily be the insurance company claims department. It might be the third-party administrator they hired. It might be the engineering firm they hired, or it might be the claims department manager that is it. But everyone else is doing a bang-up job. But there's little choke points, and there's a system that's come in. A lot of it is being done automatically with AI. So, but there's a theory in criminology. There's a lot of theories in criminology that say, why does somebody like you and I, who went to the same school, who learned the same values of right and wrong, who went to the same church, we know right and wrong, what makes somebody go to work and commit fraud like this, and how do they sleep with themselves? And one of the theories is something called the triangle of fraud, and explains why people go into the workplace and commit fraud. And it is basically, it starts with like an unshareable financial burden. I need this job. If they say we're losing money and there's layoffs, I got to pay for a mortgage, I got to pay my kids' college. I can't lose this job. Let's try to cut down on claims so company profit up, or maybe so I get promoted. So an unshareable financial burden. Then it becomes an opportunity. They're in an opportunity where they can make the right changes to commit the fraud. And the third part is justification. And that is a very important piece, because, even people you think are the biggest dirtbags ever, look in the mirror and think you're a good guy. They find a way to justify. Well, consumers steal from people anyway. Well, it's just a couple of dollars. It's no big deal. Well, maybe, this isn't legitimate damage. There's always a justification factor. And that's called the triangle of fraud. And like I say, there's systems at play here that most people don't understand. Me, after being a financial advisor in the insurance industry for 30 years, had no idea of what really goes on behind the scenes. And most people, even people that have worked in the insurance industry their whole adult lives, their whole careers, really don't understand a lot of this, much less the
So
consumer.
let's leave people with something here that let's give consumers or homeowners or renters an action item. What's the number one thing everybody should be thinking about when they buy, rent, or live in some place that could potentially experience a disaster?
Proactive mitigation. Avoid the loss up front. It is so much easier to spend a couple of extra dollars to protect your property and your family than it is to come in and go through all of this mess and fighting the insurance companies and cleaning it up and losing all of your stuff. I mean, it's just so much. There's a study from, I think the Wharton School did it for FEMA, and it basically says for every dollar spent on mitigation, you save $6 on cleanup on the back end. And it's not just a financial calculation. I can't begin to tell you the emotional trauma and the heartache that myself, my family, and my neighbors all went through And listen, maybe would have been $20,000 to raise my house before the storm. And if you talked to me before the storm, I would have been like, you're crazy. I can't, I don't have that money. I can't do it. It's too much. If you tell me now and you give me a time machine and I can go back and spend $100,000 to raise that house, I wouldn't think twice about it. I'd sell a kidney to do it, to avoid what I went through for 7 years. Mitigation is number one. It is your personal responsibility. Don't wait till it's a requirement. Don't wait till somebody, talks you into it. Spend a couple of extra bucks and protect your property and your family up front. And don't go through the mess. Don't have to fight the insurance company. Don't have to replace everything you own.
Yeah, when I was trying to raise money for different projects, and I would go to the concrete industry or any of these people that advocate safety and safe building, I would say you need to lay out the cost of not doing it that way.
Mm.
People complain it's too expensive. Show them the other number. Show them the number of this is what happens if you put up that stick frame house on the second floor right by the water versus just spending a little more and doing it the right way. I think that you're right. That's what it's going to take to wake people up.
Yeah, and they don't look. We can't make people believers storm by storm. There's got to be an emphasis in the media, in government, in just day-to-day conversation. And unfortunately, we're relying. Well, I don't even say unfortunately because we're relying on maybe the townships and the code enforcers and the state code people to make the change. And we're also relying on the construction industry to play along. But I'll tell you what, I mean, you could make me a salesman for any construction product on earth, and I'll be a billionaire because I can look you in the eye and tell you this needs to be done. Spend the extra money. I could upsell all day long because it is the right thing, and not for something that looks prettier, but something that protects your property and your family and your possessions.
Yeah, well, hey, Doug, thank you so much for coming on today. I know I've been bugging you for a while. I appreciate you taking the time. And I think people are going to love seeing you in Built to Last Buyer Beware because you said a lot of important things. Really appreciate what you do.
Thank you for getting the message out. We appreciate it.
If you have a story about your house, good or bad, I'd like to hear from you. There's a contact form in the show notes. Fill it out, send it my way, and you might be a guest on an upcoming episode. Also, check out the link in the show notes to the trailer for my new documentary film, Built to Last Buyer Beware, which is coming out this summer. Thanks for taking the time to listen today. I'll see you next time.